Welcome back to the show previously known as the Fascism Forever Club podcast. I am your host and your only one, Turfist. Because I know you guys are going to ask, Axel isn't doing this anymore for reasons that I won't explain out of respect for him, and I hope he'll do the same. The show is now just called the F Forever Club. Drop the fascism because I think fascism was the word that was getting it zucked and removed so frequently. Not just the podcast, but the page in general. Well, that and all the anti-Semitic remarks, which I need to cool it with, but it's just better if we leave that out. Also, other things that are going to be left out are things that rhyme with trigger and like to play basketball. It's just better if I keep to words that I don't think will get me banned, because it's just not good. Just not good. So, until I find a co-host, which I don't think I'm going to do, or until I have a guest, which I might here soon, it'll just be me. Alright, so on to the topic. Capitalism is a problem for nationalism. Why? There are ethical and moral implications, which we'll get into. So the argument for a total free market was summed up by the Mises Institute's founder, Ludwig von Mises, who is a minarchist libertarian type. Pretty smart guy. So Mises said, 50 or 60 years ago, it was said in almost all capitalist countries that the railroad companies were too big and too powerful. They had a monopoly. It was impossible to compete with them. It was alleged that, in the field of transportation, capitalism had already reached a stage at which it had destroyed itself, for it had eliminated competition. What people overlooked was the fact that the power of the railroads depended on their ability to serve people better than any other method of transportation. Of course, it would have been ridiculous to compete with one of these big railroad companies by building another railroad parallel to the old line, since the old line was sufficient to serve existing needs. But very soon there came other competitors. Freedom of competition does not mean that you can succeed simply by imitating or copying precisely what someone else has done. Freedom of the press does not mean that you have the right to copy what another man has written, and thus to acquire the success which this other man has duly merited on account of his achievements. It means that you have the right to write something different. Freedom of competition concerning railroads, for example, means that you are free to invent something, to do something which will challenge the railroads and place them in a very precarious competitive situation. End quote. If the economy existed inside of a vacuum, Mises is completely correct, but the economy doesn't exist inside of a vacuum. There are other elements, there are other factors, there are other variables, not the least of which is humans. Alright, so if the railroad company's example and its competitors, if they were free from the influence of each other, other than the effectiveness of their respective products, the free market would work wonderfully, again, inside a vacuum. But they don't exist in a vacuum. And the capital gained by the railroad monopoly company, it's almost always used for non- or railroad-related activities. The word capital refers to the collection of economic gains, and those gains can be used to purchase goods or fund other ventures. And in total free market capitalism, the railroad company CEO is free to use his capital to fund things that do not have to start at the bottom or in the middle, so you get a loan and then you start a business. Well, in this example, the railroad monopoly company CEO, he doesn't have to start anywhere. He can just start wherever he pleases and do as well as he pleases, as long as he is kept afloat by his railroad company. So the CEO doesn't have to operate within a competitive hierarchy like he did when he started that monopoly, which wasn't a monopoly when he started, obviously, but he had to get to that point by starting somewhere. And when you get to the top, like this railroad monopoly CEO would, and he would, control transportation, which is also a problem, but once it gets to that point, he has monumental amounts of capital. So marketing, advertising, production, and sales don't have to scale up with the effectiveness of a product if he starts to go into another business. Instead, his railroad company would be able to indefinitely fund whatever he wishes to pursue, totally unrestrained by competition, because with competition, you need to think not just of what you're going to make and how you're going to make it, but you have to think, how am I going to make it, and can I make it better than this guy's? Can I advertise better? Can I be more widespread? You don't have to do that if you don't start at the bottom or the middle or wherever. So with all that capital and all that power that he has, because he controls a transportation industry, he can do whatever he likes. He can do bad things or good things, and on the good end of things, you can be a philanthropist. But if you're malevolent, then you can fund things like subversion, bribery, or strong-arming, or any number of horrid things that hurt and don't help. And that's the problem with capitalism. Well, that's where they start, and one of the many things. So let's say the railroad company CEO, let's say he wants to start a candy business. If he wants to saturate the market just willy-nilly with his product, candy in this example, he can saturate it. It doesn't matter if his company can sustain itself. It doesn't matter if he has absolutely abysmal commercials and advertisements. It doesn't matter if he doesn't do all the necessary things you need to do in order to make your product successful. It doesn't matter. His product's already successful, or it can at least look that way. His advertising would be everywhere. His horrible product could be sold at rock bottom prices to any idiot who would make the purchase. And there would be lots of idiots. And in this example, the candy company is just an annoyance. But if he wants to, he could pay a bunch of people to sing the praises of his product, or he could pay retailers to only carry his product. So he could beat out the competition, and he could be the leading role in the industry that he just stepped into out of for no reason whatsoever, except for he just wanted to do it. So then imitators of his company would start to pop up, not knowing that the CEO didn't actually do anything to earn his place in the market, but they just follow him anyway, not knowing that they shouldn't have followed his example. So the problems start to add up really, really quickly. And that's without even stepping out outside the bounds of the economic element. And even though we haven't, there are already widespread and potentially life-ruining implications of a total free market. Already, some guy who, let's say, his dear father, he was a chocolatier. And his dear chocolatier father taught him how to make the best chocolate in the world. And it actually is the best chocolate in the world. And he's even good at advertising, and he's good at marketing, and he's good at getting customers. Well, it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter because he wouldn't be able to sell his product to retailers who would then make him profit. He can't do that. So he would have to do a lot more things that he wouldn't have access to, that he wouldn't even be able to do because of what the CEO did. Now, the CEO, that's just an example that people are familiar with. It doesn't even have to be a CEO. It could be a fucking mid-level manager. Who cares? As long as it's a very big, very rich monopoly, as long as they're paid enough, they can do this. This is where laws and regulations come in, because this problem that I've explained isn't new by any stretch of the imagination. Laws and regulations make it so that the problem I've outlined doesn't happen, or it in part doesn't happen, but let's say that laws and regulations are able to totally stop the CEO from making any progress with his candy company. The person that would do such a thing is still that person, and just because there are laws that stop him from doing that doesn't mean he's not going to do it. The murder is illegal, but you can still murder. If he would like to fund a candidate and choose everything that they make into policy or that they pass into law, should that person win, then he could fund the entire campaign and make that person win. But let's say, oh, well, no, people still have opinions and they still have political outlooks, so, well, then he'll just need to get rid of those, won't he? If they have morals or ethics that's standing in the way of that candidate winning, well, then you can just, over time, strip the morals and ethics. It wouldn't be impossible, and that exact thing happened, like, in reality. So the libertarian answer for these kinds of problems is the non-aggression principle. It says that any individual should be allowed to self-determine so long as they don't stop another person from self-determining. But their mindset is that self-determination only pertains to individual liberty and private property and only needs to be held up in those regards. And because of that, crime and punishment become disjointed if there's no individual to decide. It's very strange, right? So this example is pretty esoteric, and you're only going to run into it if you argue with the most staunchly Ancapistan of libertarians. But, all right, so let's say a man breaks into someone's house and he wants to murder. And the homeowner can shoot the assailant, that's perfectly reasonable. But if the homeowner is a coward and doesn't want to shoot the intruder, and then his wife is raped and his family's murdered, if he still doesn't want to kill the intruder afterwards, should the intruder be allowed to live? And who decides if the intruder is allowed to live? So the individual used his self-determination to be a coward. And if that were the end of the discussion, the criminal would be free to go and rape and murder until someone decides to stand up and kill that criminal. But what if the individual is a pacifist and then he decides that the murderer, should be imprisoned instead of killed? That would require, in Ancapistan nap territory, it would require that there would be some kind of voluntary funded prison to be formed, but whatever. All right, so let's say the individual who had his family raped and murdered, let's say that he commits suicide. So now he can't self-determine, like no one can determine what happens, even though it should be his right to judge the fate of the murderer, but he can't do that because there's no one there. So then Who decides the fate of the criminal? At this game of what if this happens or what if that happens, there's no end with the non-aggression principle. And why is that? It was because the individual and the collective can't be separated, but the non-aggression principle tries to separate them. If someone murders, it doesn't matter if the victim's family doesn't want the murderer to be punished. The potential victims want that murderer to be punished, and a lot of them would preferably like him dead. And the people shouldn't have to form a voluntary tribunal in order to see that person punished. If 90% of a population don't care if a murderer roams free, it would be the 10% whose judgment would be called upon, regardless of the fit thrown by the 90%. It doesn't matter if they don't care if a murderer is roaming free. They don't get to decide that. They obviously can't decide what to do if someone murders. They don't understand that murder is bad and what could potentially happen from that. No, the 10% would choose what happens. It's like if you gave it up to the 90% to decide, then that's like giving a fat person the ability to decide what's healthy to eat and what's not healthy to eat. So for legal issues like with murder and things like that, you look at the collective well-being and the potential actions of a criminal after they commit a crime. What are they going to do next? So that's completely fine when it's with legal issues, but what if you look at it for economic issues? Then people start to play the same what-if game, but it's with the degeneracy and things like that. So laws are the regulation of human behavior and the potential problems that may come from that behavior. It's not unreasonable to regulate human behavior as it operates within the economic realm, as long as you can prove potential harm. And if it can be determined and proven, then it should be regulated, just like human behavior is with murder and rape and robbery and so forth. So drugs are a good example. Without the potential harm to humans that may come from drug trafficking use, drug regulation is illogical and useless. It's just economic. It doesn't make any sense, because if they're not being harmed, then drugs wouldn't be regulated, but they are regulated. Why? It's because drugs are looked at through the lens of potential and proven harm, not through the lens of economic viability. Heroin is completely viable in the free market, and it would create plenty of jobs, but the harm that would come from opening a heroin market is way, way, way greater than any economic benefit that would come from opening a heroin market. In the same way that heroin can't be viewed from the standpoint of marketability and sales, the economy can't either. What we can sell, what we can advertise, what companies can make, and what we can buy, those shouldn't be judged from the standpoint of profitability alone. And that's why capitalism conflicts with nationalism. Monetary gains don't translate to the benefit of the nation. A rich man and a poor man a rich man, look at him, is he good? A poor man, look at him, is he good? There's no way you could determine that. The amount of money a nation has does not equal the amount of good a nation is. But Turfus, they tell me, communism and Marxist socialism aren't any kind of alternative. Like, of course not. Marxist socialism and communism don't care what will or won't harm people. They only care about workers' rights and some apparent exploitation of labor. And I mean, the things that they have problems with, they're still problems, or else it wouldn't have convinced anybody. Like, workers shouldn't be exploited and slavery is objectionable. Is pretty simple stuff. But that's not the issue with capitalism. Like, solving those things isn't the issue with capitalism. Like, you don't need to solve that, and that's why we need to get away from it. It has almost nothing to do with it. The issue is with the way capitalism allows for and flourishes with subversion, degeneracy, escapism, materialism, and a lot of libertarians would say, oh no, materialism, capitalism, those aren't connected. Oh no. And what stopped materialism from coming around in, like, say, the 1930s and 40s, before the capitalism got real bad, was religion. Religion prevented these things from taking hold, but not anymore. And Christian revivalists think that the reinstitution of religious law, that would be sufficient to revert a nation back to the way America was in 1940. But that's hardly the case. A simple reversion back to the way things were in the past, that would only work until the next time this happens. And then we have to revert again. Like, no, a total overhaul of economic practice and law and economic law is necessary so that another gradual slide back into degeneracy would be absurdly difficult, if not impossible. Laws and practices need to be specifically designed to stop a slide into degeneracy in order to stop it from happening again. What is marketable and what inside of a vacuum with products and goods and buying and selling existing completely outside the realm of what harms the nation, that is not the point. If a business opportunity is good for someone and his family, he shouldn't be stopped from pursuing it. National Socialism doesn't say that you're not allowed to do this or you're not allowed to do that within the market, as long as it's not harming anyone or harming the nation, harming the Volk, the people, the nation. As long as it's not harming anything, you're allowed to do. And in fact, it's encouraged. Private property encouraged. Entrepreneurialism, that's completely encouraged. Free enterprise encouraged. National Socialism does not want to take your property. It doesn't want to take your guns. It doesn't want to stop you from opening a business. It doesn't want to do any of that. It wants to stop the person who has done all of that and then decides to do something bad with it. It wants to prevent things from popping up that lead to degeneracy, and you can prove it. Or it leads to the harm of a person's mind, and you can prove it like we can prove with drugs, with meth and heroin. These things are horrible, horrible, horrible for you. Like, oh, well, if someone decides to do it, then they decide to do it. Like, it's not just them. They don't exist within a vacuum either. They do meth and they decide to go, they stay up days and days on end and they go kill someone because of the meth or because of the PCP. Jesus. It doesn't matter if that singular person decides to do it. The things that they do as a result of it, the things that happen to people as a result of the subversive and degenerate things, that's the problem. All right, so business opportunities. And again, if it's a good opportunity and it's not going to have any subversive or degenerate implications that are going to harm the people or even the people directly related to the person attempting it, then he should be allowed to do it. And if whatever he wants to do helps the nation, not just himself and his family, then more power to him. The resources should be given to that person. He should have them. But again, he should still be able to own and defend his private property, and no one's going to put a gun to your head and say, give money, gives money. National socialism is necessary for anyone who cares for their nation and their people. It requires an understanding of what I've explained. If you're disconnected from your nation and people, the capitalism will keep you that way. The individual can do and own as he pleases, but he can't sell or profit from things that harm the nation. That's it. That's the problem with capitalism. That is what National Socialism is from an economic standpoint. National Socialism acknowledges that the economy doesn't exist within a vacuum, and that people who have the power to do bad things often will, and that they need to be stopped from doing that. And America, by the way, isn't even a completely capitalist free market economy. No, we don't have that. We haven't had it for a very, very long time. The railroad example is pretty funny because antitrust laws were made by the first Roosevelt because of the railroad monopolies, and Bell Telephone is another one that happened. Yeah, we haven't been a totally free market economy in a very long time. We have what's called a mixed economy, which is basically capitalism, TM, but with an asterisk, and it's not really. It has socialist band-aids all over it. All right, I know this was kind of short, but I can only do hour-long or 2 or 3 or 4 hour-long stints when I have someone with whom I can speak and who's my co-host or that is a guest, or we have a topic that we can talk about. Because when it's just me, when I get my point out of the way, which I'm pretty quick at doing, that's it. And it's better if they're this short so that I don't have to have such a long time of droning on about something that doesn't even matter, and then I get off topic and so on and so forth. But if you'd like to submit a topic that I should talk about, or if you're curious about something, you have a question, message the page, and if it's good and I think you're not being an asshole, then we'll do it. And by asshole, I mean shilling. And I might make a group that I can invite people to so that I can actually have guests on for this, invite them to a call and record. This has been F Forever Club with your host, Turfus, and good talk.